I'm Bob Henderson. I'm the Nomad Dad, and the production staff at Nomad Capitalist has asked me to talk about a few things that might help you with your plan B, your plan C, and beyond, or at least get you to think about those sorts of things if you haven't already. So I'm going to talk about travel tips for older travelers. We've been doing this pretty extensively now for 10 years. I have not been to as many countries as Andrew has, but still enough to give you a pretty good indication as to what you need to look for while you travel. If you're from the U.S., the U.S. State Department has a program called the STEP program where you can register with the State Department. I presume this is if you're in a country and something horrible happens there, it's easier for them to get you out of. I've never done that. Part of the reason I haven't is, I'm just a little bit circumspect. I'm not quite sure that I like them to know exactly what I'm doing all the time, but maybe one of these days I'll come to regret that, so I leave that up to you. As far as traveling, I will say this. Now, Andrew's had his conference, his event, in this past year in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And of course, from the U.S., I flew to Singapore, spent a couple of days there, and then up to KL. It's about an hour plane ride. Both of those countries, and also Tbilisi, Georgia, by the way, the country of Georgia, where Andrew's got a presence, both owning property, and some of his employees are in Tbilisi. Those three countries are really, really hard on taking controlled substances into the country. And I'll meet a number of people from the U.S. that have this view of, well, we're the U.S., we're the biggest and the best. Our way's the only way, so on and so forth. When you're going to another country, what's the old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans? You need to pay attention to their laws and their customs. And I know Andrew spoke to some of his staff about arriving in KL. He says, do not come in halter tops to immigration. Do not come in frayed jeans. Be business casual, because they might look at you a little differently. Keep in mind, it's a Muslim country. It is not a strict Muslim country. It's not uber conservative Muslim, but they look at things a little differently. But on the drugs, when you are going to a country, you can find out what you can take and what you cannot take. And usually you're going to be able to take your medications. It's advised that you take them in the bottle, the actual prescription bottle. Maybe a note from the doctor would be helpful. But do not be taking controlled substances into places like the Republic of Georgia, Singapore, KL, and other Muslim countries. I mean, technically, if I read it correctly, you could be put in jail, or worst case, put to death. And I would assume that means you've got quite a bit, so it's for sale. But I'm not taking any chances. I do not take, I am prescribed on occasion Xanax for flying anxiety, which I no longer have. I'm watching YouTube. I listen to these pilots. I'm not the least bit concerned about flying anymore. But I wouldn't dream of taking that into those countries. I just don't want to have to find out what the consequences would be. And there are some others. So look before you go at what is acceptable and what is not. I think take credit cards. Take credit cards that don't have foreign transaction fees. Sometimes those mean that you have to pay an annual fee for, but oftentimes that's not the case. Always, when you're charge in the local currency so you don't have to pay, the exchange rate. That's the best way to do it. Depending on where you're going, not every country has Uber. I know, for instance, I brought up KL. That's Grab, G-R-A-B. They're a food service. Yeah, you're in KL, and all these guys are on their bikes with the food in the back, flying all over the place to deliver the food. That's the Grab food, but it's also a taxi service. You get the taxi app on your phone. Have that set up ahead of time before you leave your country of origin with your credit card information in there. Now, in the case of Grab, I couldn't actually activate it until I got to Singapore and then eventually KL. But at least I had the credit card information in there so that, I just asked for the taxi, Here's where I am, here's where I'm going, and paid for automatically. It's just so easy. So have that set up ahead of time. Andrew's got a presence in Belgrade, Serbia. That's Cargo, I think, is one of the taxi apps there. And I have that on my phone as well. In Tbilisi, I believe it's Bolt. I believe that was in Budapest, Hungary as well, Bolt. So have these apps on your phone, have the credit card info put in there, make sure the credit card is up to date in terms of the expiration date. And then when you get there, you do the rest of the activation, but have that set up ahead of time. Make sure you take your passport. If you're a resident of a country, your residency card, of course, whatever passport you go into the country with, that's the one you leave with. I know in Mexico, when we leave, we're permanent residents, permanente. We have to actually check out of the country at a separate booth. And then when we come back, we kind of check back in. So I'm not sure what the case is with every country. You may want to check that. If you're a resident of a particular country, when you leave, do you need to check out of the country before you actually leave the country? So these are some tips. That's not just for older travelers, but that'd be for travelers in general. Now, if you don't absolutely have to be somewhere at a particular point in time, I have found, particularly in this day and age of the shortage of pilots, sometimes weather gets in the way depending on the time of year you fly. Christmas holidays, or maybe in the dead of winter. Winter can be an issue. Thunderstorms, obviously, in the summer. If something gets delayed at a major airport, it's going to delay the whole system. Give yourself extra time. Try not to cut it too close. When we come down to Mexico, we tend to bring a little bit more as we're trying to furnish a second home as well. This is not difficult to check as far as baggage is concerned, but be ready to have it inspected when you get to whatever country you're going and have a good answer. You know, what we do is we write down what it is. And since we're going to Mexico, we write it in Spanish. So if it's kitchen materials, cocina. That's we write so that it's easily accessible for the immigration officer. So those are some travel tips. Things don't always work smoothly on the journey, so don't cut things too close. Give yourself that extra time because sometimes things go wrong. Same thing could happen with domestic travel. So these are some of my thoughts, travel tips. I'd love to see what your comments are, and perhaps there's something I missed I can answer in a future video for you. I'm Bob Henderson. I'm the Nomad Dad.